Hey guys, welcome back to Mindless Adventures. Today we are in Fort Wayne, Indiana at the fort for their reenactment for the post-Miami 1754 to 1763. The French Indian War, I believe it is. Let's go check it out. Come on. He's waiting on me.
You get a flyer.
No problem.
And then
What we have laid out here is gear that soldiers would have used in the 18th century. So if you'd like to know what it is or why we carry it, or have any other questions, we don't dress like this because we're shy. Well, we're about 100 years before the American Civil War. I'm portraying the French and Indian War. They sent this guy named, you might have heard of him, his name's George Washington.
Yes.
They sent him on a diplomatic mission to tell the French that Ohio was actually British territory, not French territory. And he shot an ambassador and then was forced at gunpoint to sign a treaty that gave Ohio to France. Started a global war. Rookie mistake.
Well, I'm glad you got that for me on camera. I don't know much about this era, so.
Yeah. He recorded in his journal his return. He dressed Indian style, returned all the way from basically Niagara Falls, New York, all the way back to Williamsburg, Virginia in the middle of winter. And him and another guy named Christopher Gist had an Indian guide for a little while, but it turned out the Indian guy was there to kill him. So after they shot the Indian guy, they made their way back on their own. When they got back, he wrote a journal, and his journal was read by Franklin Benjamin, who put it in the Philadelphia Gazette. So the whole country read it, all the colonies, and then it was picked up by the London Times, so everybody in England read it, and George Washington became a household name. Everybody thought he was the coolest thing ever because he had made this journey by foot from upstate New York to Virginia in the midst of the
Couple thousand miles.
Wow.
1,200, 1,500 miles probably.
Yeah, I don't know, but in the midst of the winter, you know.
Yeah.
Wow.
So that's what made him famous, and that's essentially why he ended up becoming our first president and commander-in-chief of our armed
That's
forces.
why, yeah.
That was one of my
It's the
questions, if
snowball
he was
effect.
president already or not. So.
No,
So
the
he was
country
only
wasn't
21
even formed yet.
years old then. He was just a 21-year-old kid.
So he then, the British sent regular army troops over to North America for the first time. Right, at this point, the colonies existed for a couple hundred years. And they'd sent regular army troops over here to fight the French because they didn't want to give up Ohio. Imagine fighting a war over Ohio.
It's pretty, but no.
They sent regular army troops and this guy named Braddock to run it. And George Washington signs up to be his aide and help him out. He's hoping to get a British Army commission out of this so he can rise the ranks and become an officer. He wants to be an English gentleman. And he's upper class in this country. But over there, they think upper class over here is country bumpkins. They don't care about us. And he thinks the way to get out of that and break into the upper class in England is to get a commission in the British Army and rise through the ranks in the British Army. So he hangs out with this guy named Braddock, and Braddock likes him, and they go on this expedition to take Fort Duquesne, which is what the French built in Ohio, to take over that fort and then claim Ohio. And that also doesn't go well.
Nowadays it's called Pittsburgh.
Pittsburgh.
Yeah. The Indians can teach the British Army some lessons about how to fight forest warfare and guerrilla warfare. So that doesn't go well. It's a debacle. It's an ambush, and the troops get killed, and Braddock eats a bullet, dies on the road on the way back. And
So does the vast majority of every officer with him.
yeah,
Washington's got, what, 3 bullet holes in his coat? And 2
Yeah.
horses shot
two
up
horses
under
shot out from under him, trying to rally troops, trying to fight the
Washington
sandwich
lived a
up.
blessed life. He was in so many battles that he got his coat shot through 20 times in his lifetime, but it never shot him. But it literally, he'd come home and there'd be bullet holes through his coat. He never got shot. And he'd have horses shot out from under him, and he never got shot.
Yeah.
That's
And
good.
he had someone watching out for him. But
Well,
in that particular battle, Pittsburgh is the area. What started it all is that the British colonies believed that essentially, like Massachusetts colony extended from, their charter said from sea to shining sea, essentially, right? Well, they had no idea the country was 3,000 miles long, right? So they thought maybe 100 miles. But anyway, from Boston all the way to the Pacific was Massachusetts country, right? Which would have included Michigan, more or less, right? They drew the lines. Well, the French believed that since they were coming up through the Ohio River Valley, that the Ohio River was the far side of the English colonies. So they sent this guy named Celadon
Yes.
down with a bunch of these lead plaques, which he buried some places and posted the trees and others, and it was basically a no trespassing, keep out, mission. So him and a bunch of guys came down the Ohio all the way to Mississippi and all the way down to Louisiana, and they posted a no trespassing signs. And when the guys that were over there saw them, they said, hey, the French are saying that they literally own everything west of the Ohio River. And so they said, Washington to tell them, no, you don't. But they said, well, we're not inclined to believe you, so thanks, but no thanks. And he had to go back and tell them the British are not going to leave that territory. And that's what started the French and Indian War in America. They were already fighting the 7 Years' War in Europe, so it was just an extension of another war. But, yeah, Washington is sort of blamed for that.
Oh, wow.
And weirdly enough, when he signed the Articles of Capitulation at this first battle, he went back and built a fort called Fort Necessity. But some guys from North Carolina were supposed to show up and help him out. They never showed up. So he ended up getting his troops got shot on him, and he ended up having to surrender. He didn't speak French, but he had a buddy who was Von Braun, who was his fencing teacher and buddy, and he spoke French kind of, but not very well. And in the articles that he signed, the Articles of Capitulation, it said that he had assassinated de Jumonville, which is the guy that was in charge of the fort's brother. And it said assassinated, which meant essentially murdered. There was no reason for me to do this other than I killed him, right? So Washington was wanted in France for murder for like 20 years after that.
Wow.
Yeah.